Hi, my name is Karam Zaman, and welcome to the Campfire Innovation and Impact Podcast. Tonight's guest is Nick Johnston, who's the editor-in-chief of Axios. We'll be taking questions online. If you have a question, you can tweet us at Fifth Tribe, or you can ask the question directly into the YouTube live Q&A. With that said, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the podcast,
Thank you for having me. I've never done one of these before.
Thank you so much. We also have a live audience, so we'll be taking questions from them as well. So tell us, I guess, to start with, your background and how you ended up at this little startup here in Arlington called Axios.
So I started out in the mailroom of the Washington Post right out of college. I'd been a narrative journalist, pretty typical journalist my entire career up until joining Axios. I was at the Post. I covered banking and finance. I eventually moved to Bloomberg. I covered politics for many years. I was on the Hill, did the midterms. I did the 2008 presidential campaign. I was a White House correspondent for 2 years, getting the first 2 years of the Obama administration. And during all that time, I had the sense that I was writing stories that nobody was reading, that I didn't have a good sense of kind of like who was on the other side of the screen, sort of what was my reader interested in. And an opportunity at Bloomberg to work at an internal startup called First Word, which was trying to solve that problem. They did it first in New York for financial traders, build a new service hyper-attuned to what the reader wanted. And when I worked with them, did a tryout with them, it was literally a religious experience for me. It was the first time I ever really sat down and thought about my journalism, what I was writing and who I was writing it for. And so I got to take that idea and launch it in Washington, First Word, Washington, D.C. for Bloomberg government. It was sort of a hyper attuned breaking news service for Hill folks, for congressional offices, folks like that. And ran that for 5 years, and then sort of ran up against walls at Bloomberg, where sort of like I wanted to try new things. I wanted to sort of take these to the logical extremes, sort of what I was learning about our readers, and the data I was getting on sort of how readers behave, what readers are really interested in, how long they spend on a story. They don't spend on a story. How often they click. They don't click on anything. And I thought a lot about sort of like, how could I take this to the next level? Sort of like, it's very hard to change newsroom cultures. And so what do you do? And while I was doing that at Bloomberg, the founders of Axios, Mike, Jim, and Roy, were the founders of Politico, were going through sort of the same process. Politico, even though it was a very new organization, they were sort of starting experiments, sort of like the world has changed, which I think is the most important thing that my CEO, Jim Van Eyck, talks about. Like since Politico was invented 10 years ago, the internet, Google News became dominant. Social medias were invented, and of course, the smartphone was invented. And news organizations hadn't reacted to that. And so they left Politico in early 2016. They called me that spring. I left in the summer. Spent about 6 months sort of with a blank whiteboard, just down the road in Clarendon, thinking, what kind of news media organization should we build for the universe that exists now, where I carry in my pocket all human information ever, and I can talk to my phone and Siri will tell me whatever I want to know. And I'm being bombarded constantly by Twitter notifications, by news chyrons, by Facebook kind of thing. And so like, what's the kind of news service I should build based on that? That's Axios.
That's incredible. So let's talk a little bit about the media climate here. Yeah. I think it's a very interesting conversation because Axios, this is your 2-year anniversary. Is that correct? You guys are just
what year is this? Yeah, 2 years. 2 years since we launched. Yeah.
So 2 years ago, what was happening in news? Like you have sort of the traditional publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and those guys are struggling with how to get revenue. They're looking at subscription and paid walls. You have a host of these media startups coming out. Right. That was 2 years ago. And now what you're seeing is this huge shift where like last week, what happened was you had all these layoffs at, BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, Gannett. And that wasn't, compared to last November where Mike laid off a certain percentage of people. So all these companies look like they're either struggling or contracting. And then here comes Axios.
I mean, the papers aren't struggling or contracting. Like the Post or the Times are doing really well with subscriptions. I think what's happened, and this is not something new, like I've been in journalism for almost 20 years now. I was at the Washington Post when we were trying to figure out, like when we first started publishing to web deadlines and when we first started to realize that Craigslist was about to wipe out the classified ad budget. So like we are still in the midst of, I think, the 20-year arc of journalists and journalism companies realizing that the old models are gone and still figuring out what the new models are. But I think for companies that succeed in figuring out those kind of monetization strategies, if you're the Times or the Post, I think the New York Times made $1 billion off of subscriptions. Like that's a pretty good business. I think there are websites which have figured out how to build. Like BuzzFeed made $300 million in revenue last year. That's a massively successful business. I think the struggle there is like their cost structure. So they said their cost structure was off. So there are ways to build business. I think people are still sort of figuring out exactly how to do that. But that's like that's an opportunity to be in this kind of business because the old ways are changing. Like it's so disruptive. And if you can come across a way to build a strong business, then it's just, you're off to the races.
That's great. So in that market, you saw an opportunity and that's why you ended up going to Axios. And what was it about Axios that drew you? And I know the leadership at Politico was there, but you said that their approach to news itself, the technology, how they view the consumer. What was different about Axios and these other publications? Because it's really unique. I don't know how many of you are subscribed to the Axios newsletters by show of hands. I'm subscribed to the markets one. And it is like it's like crack. Like it's so addictive. It's literally the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I'll open up my email and I'll read to the Axios markets one. And it's like a breath of fresh air in this news environment because it's so clear, and I feel like I don't want to say like balanced because it's got this connotation, but I just feel like when I'm reading it, I'm getting a good contextual understanding of what's happening in the world about major issues, and I'm not getting just like it's not like fast food where I'm just getting fed something that's really savory, but it just goes away. It's very nutritious. That's
so we're big on slogans and manifestos at Axios, and one of our slogans is smart brevity.
So what is kind of
brevity? Like, what is smart brevity? The first thing, like sort of why I approach it from the brevity standpoint. If you walk around like this and you realize that all information is being consumed essentially like this. It's moving in that direction. The people who still use laptops to read most of the information are old people and they're going to die. Everyone who's young reads it like this. So if you're going to where the people or readers are going, you'll go to their phone. And you realize how big it is. It's this big. Like so, every Axios story is broken down at its heart, sort of into something that fits on an ice cream screen. You can expand it if you want to, but that's sort of the key, about 150 words. And if you think about sort of reader engagement, like when someone clicks on a website link, how long will they stay on a website? 15 seconds, right? So that's how much time you have to get someone's attention. And so if you approach it from that and really emphasize, I think, efficiency in your writing, a story I tell about when I was running at First Word at Bloomberg when Harry Reid retired. He was a Senate Democratic leader. It's a true story. I went to the reporter on my desk at that time and I said, I don't care what the fifth word in that story is, as long as the first four are Reid won't seek re-election. Like those are the only four words that my readers cared about. They didn't care that Reid was a lawyer who went to Georgetown Law School while he was a night cop and that he was a boxer. His mom worked in a brothel. No. They knew those stories. They'd read those on Wikipedia. They'd heard those stories from Harry Reid himself. That's the only information you needed. So if you can distill the important parts of the information that you have into that, instead of a traditional news story, which is 800, 1,000 words long, I think the readers will react to that. We also think a lot about formatting of it. Part of the foundation of Axios, we met with a university professor who does a lot of studies on eye tracking, follows how an eye navigates text. And he learned that particularly on digital, particularly on mobile, when an eye is confronted with a big block of text, the eye gets very sad. And so if you're familiar with Axios style, we broke it up with bullets, with bolding, with being like very clear guidelines to help an eye navigate that kind of text. So that's the format, that's the brevity side. Brevity doesn't work just for the sake of being short unless you're smart as well. Like I love telling the Mark Twain joke. I'm sorry I didn't write you a short letter. I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long one instead. Distilling information down into those key points is really, really difficult. You can't fake it. Markets is really good. It's because the reporters on it, Dion and Courtney, are really, really smart about the topics they're covering. And so they can watch, Courtney can watch the Fed press conference today that goes on for 90 minutes and distill it down and to hear the 200 words that Jay Powell said that are really important. And so what we've done is we've been incredibly fortunate in hiring journalists who are really smart, who are proven experts in all the fields that we cover, tech and business and politics and autonomous vehicles in China. So they can write super efficiently for an audience which doesn't want to sit there and read 10,000 words.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, when I read the newsletters, it's one of the few newsletters I'll read from beginning to end. And I just find it, like, I'm not trying to say this just to, like, praise you. Like, it's great. I generally feel like it's so different. When I first, it was so simple. I was like, well, that's it. And I was very skeptical of it. I was like, oh, that's the news. That's the news. It's like in a newsletter. Right. And then you start reading it and it's like incredible in terms of the value. And I think that model it's worked great. I mean, you've only been around for 2 years.
We are still in business. That is
You're
correct.
Still in business. Your first round you raised 10 million. Your second round was 20 million.
Right.
And revenue wise, like this is incredible for a startup in general, but for news, that's even better. 2017 revenue, you guys did 12.5 million. You doubled it in 2018, and you almost broke even. You were, that's awesome. So if I was an investor, I'd be like, wow, these guys are doing great. And you guys are, my understanding is you're not trying to seek more funding. Your focus
We've got our founders were talking about this week because it's our anniversary. We raised the first round of 10 million. We raised the second round of 20, and the 20 million is still in the bank.
That's great. That's incredible. So you've got this incredible growth that's happened so far. What do you think has been the driver of that success in the sense that, in terms of like your business model? Like I know like other news publications are focusing on like, maybe it's how much traffic they're driving to banner ad clicks or subscriptions. You guys don't really have that on your website as far as, you have in the newsletter these little
ads. Not banner ads. They're all native advertising. What we thought about a lot, I think what a lot of media organizations are figuring out is if you're building a business based on scale, you're competing with other businesses who are based on scale for clicks. And the two businesses that are based on scale for clicks are Google and Facebook, and you're going to lose. Vin van de Heij, our CEO, gave a speech at a conference once where he sort of laid out this vision. And I think when I saw that speech, it sort of, I'd be very interested in sort of following him wherever he went. He called it the crap trap, where companies that would go off advertising based on the volume of clicks were constantly chasing diminishing returns, where what you got a nickel for, you get a penny for, and you get a half penny for, as Google and Facebook hoovered up all that information. And I think some of the changes you've seen with some of the larger media organizations that have scaled, that's what they encountered. And so we don't do banner ads. We don't do programmatic advertising. We don't chase volume. What I'm really focused on is sort of an engaged reader. Like that's why I love newsletters. Like if you're signed up for a newsletter, you've given me your email address, you've demonstrated intent to consume this content. Like you want it every day. Like the greatest thing that ever happens to me, amongst the many great things that ever happened to me, are weekends when Mike Allen, who writes our main newsletter, Axios AM, 7 days a week, he sleeps in on weekends. And so it goes out around 6 a.m. on weekdays. It goes in around 10 or 11 on weekends. And occasionally our general inbox on weekends will get emails saying like, hey, I didn't get Mike's email today. Like, is my spam filter broken? Is he okay? And I'm like, and I write back, like, no. He'll send it at 10. Everything that's great. But that kind of reader engagement is unbelievable. I think it's far more valuable for us to sell to advertisers. And it's great to have that kind of relationship with readers. And so we've just sort of, the way we approached building it as a business was different from the beginning. Yeah,
and to be honest, I hate paywalls. Like if I want to read an article, they give you that first sort of like paragraph, then you can't kind of get past it. And so the question I have is like, I love the user experience of Axios.
Right.
Because it's just so great.
Well, think about
it's not intrusive, it's not annoying.
Go to a news website now, like a one that's built poorly, and just they treat their readers like assholes, right? Where it's sort of like there's a pop-up and a pop-under, and then a video starts playing, and this video has volume, and I can't find the volume.
And the video ad is completely not relevant.
And then as I start reading, it'll pop up again. And then another video will start playing. And then an autoplay ad will start playing. And just like, and then you'll scroll through all this text to see 2 more banner ads when they only had 2 sentences of information.
It's like Blade Runner, like the cityscape, but on your phone, where just like so much sensory overload is happening. And you don't get the news.
And the reason on that is because they had to keep chasing that. Okay, look, I got a certain amount of money for the banner ad, but when that money went down, okay, I have to monetize other things. So now there's another banner ad. Now there's a pop-up ad. Now there's a pop-under ad. Now I'm tricking you into clicking something that draws you to another ad. And it's just that reader experience is miserable.
It's terrible. And you guys have found sort of a way out of it. And so when I read the newsletters, I kind of get like the same ad over and over again. It's like a social ETF.
Yeah.
And so
that is the launch sponsor for the iShares is a launch sponsor for markets. And so they get to program 2 spots in the ad. Do they need new creative? Is that what you're telling me? I can bring that back.
No, I just thought it was interesting because I remember the ad. Yeah. And normally when I read the news,
even better.
I don't remember the ad at all. It'll be like in my, you'll cross it out. But I'm like ETFs for, I'm studying ETFs right now, and it's a social ETF. So for me, I was like, I don't know if there was any targeting involved, but I was like, oh, this is the type of company that I would actually maybe look into for investment purposes. And I thought that was great. And I was like, and it was so subtle because the ad didn't just, it's like, it's all text, right? And so what you'll see, there's like,
it's text and one visual. So what we do is ads that are essentially, it's a form of native advertising. So we take this idea of smart brevity and we take it to our branded content team takes it to the companies that advertise this. It's like, this is how you should present your information. It's like, we've stumbled upon something. Don't do a 10,000 word deep dive immersive experience about whatever you're trying to sell. No one's going to click on it. That's, surprise. Do it as in smart brevity. Do it as a, make it fit on a single iPhone screen, and so the reader can scroll through it. Don't make it intrusive and obnoxious. And so if you don't want to read the ad, you just move your thumb like that and you're on to the next story.
And so those numbers, they work. I mean, you guys, it's only the beginning of 2019, You guys did 25 million last year, and you've already got 16 million booked in revenue for this year. That's incredible from your partners. Like that's awesome.
What Roy Schwartz, our president, who runs our ad sales team, likes to talk about sort of as the efficiency of the efficacy of our ads is, we started with a handful of launch partners in 2016, 2017, and then we have 100% renewal. Like they all come back. They realize that's sort of
100% renewal.
They all. That's what Roy tells me. They all agree that this is a good way of advertising, and they all come back into it again.
That's great. And so you got 18 newsletters. So we want to talk a little about the newsletters. Like I read the markets one.
Yeah.
I actually don't read the political one because I'm like, I get enough political news just by friends and family. And when I want to get news that's like, this is what's happening in the business and commerce and what's happening for me as a
business. Edge too.
Okay, cool.
It's the Sunday one. So like the way we've approached it is we started in politics. That was my background. That was their background. That was the newsletter Mike was writing. And I think that I viewed that as a test bed for this model. Like, can we get this idea we have about distributing content and building a business around it to work in politics? And so we started in politics and sort of policy, politics, healthcare, energy, and then Primax Deals newsletter, which was just a magical unicorn that we got when we launched as well, to see if that worked. And then since then, what we've done very deliberately from an editorial standpoint is look for topics that will shape the next century, which isn't typically politics. And so since then, we've launched something on just science. Science was the first test we did to see if we can get a topic as far away from possible from politics as we knew and see if it works. So we hired Allison Snyder as our first science editor. She's an MIT trained biochemist. I'm going to get yelled at for this, some kind of chemist, to say, can you translate important science news into this style? And the coolest email I think we got about that was an astrophysicist who wrote in and said, I didn't think this would work, but it does. So we found, yes, you can do that. And then we viewed it as like, what are the trends that are going to shape the next century? And so we partnered with Bill Bishop, who is an awesome Chinese scholar, write a Chinese newsletter. We've launched one on autonomous vehicles, which I think is going to reshape sort of essentially everything we do in the way we live our lives. We want to have one on media trends, which is about how we consume information and how that's changing and impacting society. The next one we're launching is on space. We're just starting hiring for one on cities to see how sort of these are about to change with sort of technology growing. And then the way I kind of view all these is sort of like there's a collision of these kind of stories. Sort of like an AV story is a tech story, becomes a city's story. Media trends is a tech story, is a politics story, is a business story. And so see where all these things collide to sort of tell the stories and trends that will shape the next century beyond just politics. How
did you come up with these topics? Is this based on data? Is it more like intuition?
The first couple were just intuition, sort of like, and where we can find the right talent. Remember, the key to smart brevity is smart, so to make sure we hire talent in the right place. The way we've done our roadmap for 2019 is I just crowdsourced it. Went to the entire newsroom and asked, what are topics that are going to be important in the next century that we are undercovering or not covering at all? And I started with a Google document that probably had about 180 items on it. And then we started cutting those down into what are topics that are worth sort of a one-off thing. We do something called deep dives, where we pick an individual topic and devote an entire newsletter to it, sort of every other Saturday or so. We broke off some of those topics into deep dives, and then we looked at the other topics, like, are these topics that are big enough and important enough where we want to write them with like a regular cadence? And so that's where we came out with my roadmap for this year, which is space, cities. We're going to do future of education later in the year, and then my dream is to one day launch something on blockchain if I can find someone who can explain blockchain.
That's great. I mean, I'm sure there's people in DC you could figure that out with. That's awesome. So you went through sort of the traditional media route, and now you're at this startup, basically. I mean, how do you feel like what are the pros and cons of working at a bigger institution versus, let's say, a place like Axios?
I mean, I would talk sort of broadly about, I went from a $9 billion company to being the fifth employee at a company. And the changes for that are being at a startup, you really forget the infrastructure that exists at a large company. Like how many people there were when I was at Bloomberg or at any large company to just help you do stuff or have already figured out sorts of things. I remember the first time I wanted to hire someone at Axios, I went to, like, we were probably 7 people at the time, and I went to the office manager, who's now our chief of staff, and I was like, all right, how do I hire this person? And she's like, what are you talking about?
There's no process.
Like, there's no process. So we printed out an offer letter and had a blank space on it for vacation days. I'm sort of like, well, how many vacation days do we get? She's like, I don't know. So we sort of had to invent on that, which is both fun and terrifying.
It's
like the first year, like you get to the end of the first 6 months, we're like, okay, we need to create from scratch a process for evaluating our employees. What is valuable and what is not. And you don't realize how at large companies, all of that is built for you.
It's figured out.
That's such a security blanket sometimes. But the flip side of that is that you get to invent it.
Like you can reinvent processes
or you create them for the very first time. Like what I love telling new hires when they bring them on to do something is like, what you're about to do, no one has done at Axios. You're going to invent it. I have no idea what this newsletter is going to look like. I have no idea what this content looks like. I have no idea what this idea will look like until it comes out of your brain. Like this is yours. You get to create it. And that is probably the most fun thing about being at a startup.
So there's a lot of autonomy and there's a lot of freedom and innovation. And so what do you feel are I mean, you're obviously not going to say something too crazy, but what do you feel are some of the things that you would maybe like caution people when they go to these smaller institutions that are just different?
What we did that was really smart, and I don't realize until later, and I think this is probably a mistake companies make, is I was the 5th hire. The 6th hire was a director of HR.
Great. Wow, that's interesting.
And like, which I didn't much. Okay, one day she was at work, and I thought that's great. But it was unbelievable to me as we started to grow to have a professional in that role, to begin to think from day one about recruiting and hiring and culture, and to help building like these processes seriously. Like if I had been left to my own devices and start to build an eval system for the newsroom that was 20, 30 people at launch, it would have been a catastrophe. But instead I had someone whose job it was, and that role, that grew very quickly. Like I'm told all the time how sort of our HR talent recruiting people operations is much larger than expected for a company our size, because like we really invested in that.
I mean, that's
in
incredible.
A process to recruit and a process to train and a process to sort of manage that kind of
They say that usually most companies, they hire an HR person usually when they're like 20 to 50. And that's like your 6th hire. So that showed you had a very particular vision.
There's no way I could have built the company without like, so like we hired, like I hired 30 journalists, probably, maybe not 30, maybe 20 journalists before launch. And so that's from August to January, we had to ramp up that quickly. So having a support structure to do that was invaluable. And having a person who is smart on these issues, on sort of how to think about hiring and recruiting, I think was incredible. And then how to think about sort of workplace culture. And then when problems arise, because problems were like, to have problem solvers there, I couldn't imagine how we would have done it without that.
Were you involved in also helping to get funding for the startup? Was that something that you
No, I came in they generally secured the funding by the time I was there. A funny story I remember, I was in the office when we were probably like 7 or 8 people in sort of one shared space in Clarendon on a Friday afternoon, and like a very important FedEx envelope arrives, and I'm like, I don't know, and like somebody jokes, I bet that's the $10 million, and I was like, whatever, and I threw it on the desk, and we came back on Monday and it was a $10 million.
That's great.
It was the cashier's check from the funders.
That's great.
For that. So I helped put that on the desk. I did not help raise it.
So you've seen this growth happen. How did you plan out the growth? Like, what was your vision for the newsroom? And you had so much freedom to do it. So how did you? What was your vision for like how it should be built, and how are you making it different from other places?
We're very reporter driven. Like sort of the key beating heart of Axios is the newsletters, the daily newsletters, and so it was very much finding people who want to do that, who are into it and like it, and then building a structure around that lets them do it, because doing a daily newsletter is really hard, right? It's a lot of work. And then, so it was making sure we had the technology, like a CMS that we cobbled together with outside help to have that ready for when we started. And then what kind of editing support would they need? And then what kind of what else would the newsroom need to serve that? So it was sort of like creating those newsletters and then also having a site where those newsletters can live. And so we've been very methodical, sort of like building from newsletter to newsletter to newsletter on topic that we're find interesting.
That's great. And then what were some of the challenges that you had? Either the ones that you foresaw or ones that were like unforeseeable and that kind of surprised you as you're building out this team. And you're at 140.
We're 104, probably north of 140 now in the newsroom, including our visuals team is probably.
So you had 100 people the first year, and then.
Yeah, we probably have maybe 40 or 50 when we launch.
Wow.
That's
incredible growth, right?
I mean, that's the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge has been hiring. It's sort of like what I think about the most, what is the most important thing to get right, which is why I'm so happy that we built that support structure to achieve that. That has been super important. From a content standpoint, the greatest thing I learned is the importance of visuals. I've been a print journalist my entire life. I never thought about visuals. I never cared about visuals. In a notorious early meeting at Axios, I said we shouldn't have visuals because it's just a waste of time. I lost that argument, thank God, because we built an amazing visuals team. We're really known for the illustrations and the data visualizations we do.
Yeah, I
it's
love
such an
it. It's
engaging
so
way
fresh, yeah.
to draw in readers. And so I think it was smart to have those different viewpoints. Like what's fascinating to me, particularly from a media company, is when we first started with that blank whiteboard in August of 2016, is the people around the table where the founders and then me, the first editorial hire, but sales was in that meeting too, and marketing was in that meeting too, and the chief technology officer was in that meeting, and the chief design officer. And all those people contributed to sort of what that vision would look like. And it was the chief design officer who beat me in the argument about visuals, thank God, because me being right on that would have been a catastrophe.
So some of these other hires, I know like in some newsrooms, they're focusing a lot like, oh, we need to hire data scientists, we need to hire videographers. And your approach was very unique and very different from the market in that sense. Have you guys hired, I'm assuming you guys have hired those types of people, but
we have,
not in terms of the ratios.
We have a video team, which is good, but it's not huge. The way I view kind of things like that is good video is really hard and really expensive, and it should be left to professionals. And I'm not a professional. And so we hired a small professional video team, but that doesn't mean we can do 1,000 videos every day. And so we've really tried to stick with what we're good at. And what we're good at is, Axios smart brevity and writing newsletters, and not going and doing, oh, we're going to do 10 podcasts because podcasts are hot. Or, oh, we're going to go pivot to video because
it's a fad and it's a trend.
Right. I mean, I think it's very important to resist that. Like I speak a lot to journalism students, and they ask those kind of questions. Like, why don't you do more podcasts? Why don't you do more videos? And I'm like, we're not good at podcasts. Like we experiment with the podcast. We have one podcast with Dan Primack, which is really good, but it's really hard to do. And I don't want to ramp up 50 of those just because they're interesting. Like a lot of people talk about, oh, you should do your version of The Daily that the New York Times does. And I'm like, no, The Daily is really, really good. Michael Barbaro is a genius on that show. I just can't decide I'm going to do that. And I think if you're not deliberate about making those decisions, that's where you get it wrong.
Yeah, and the other benefit is that you guys own all the data that comes from your newsletters. What sort of, I guess one is like, what sort of attrition rate are you seeing with that? So
I don't have that. Wow, that's a good question. We don't see attrition. Like the numbers all go up to the right.
Yeah.
We are up to, I don't know, I think maybe 500,000 subscribers across all of our newsletters. Open rates range from 40 to 60%.
That's incredible.
If you know about newsletter industry standards, like those are really
that's amazing. Numbers. If my marketing team had 46%, I mean, that'd be awesome.
But that's because we've deliberately not sort of crammed our list. Like the list has been built very organically, like a couple people a day, not a couple hundred people a day now, and I think that keeps engagement very high.
And then, I guess from a privacy perspective, are you like one of the things that is being very heavily scrutinized right now is sort of like personal data that's coming out on Facebook, and I mean Facebook and Google and a lot of this stuff, but you have all this rich data about open rate, click rates, and what information are you giving to say like advertisers with regards to your readership?
Not a ton. So like we're not participating in these programmatic ad networks. So like we're not hoovering up data, and I think this is like I'm going to blow this question because you should have our chief technology officer here could explain much better sort of the way they frame it, and the way like we didn't build an ad that when you load up those trackers that say how many things are watching you when you're on this page. I hope I'm getting this right. There aren't a million things.
I feel like it's so good to be true. So everybody's like, what's the hook? Like, how are you getting me? Is it my data? Is it this? And I think that's what's really unique about Axios. Is like it's so different. Like people have to just try it.
I mean, we want to learn more about that, and we do have demographic data to tell like where people are coming from, and you can compile that kind of stuff. Like email send programs are very good about that. Websites can figure that out, but I don't need that. Like I don't need to know you Google searched for shoes to sell you shoes because I'm not running programmatic ads. I'm not like harvesting that data in the surface of ads. We probably collect some data just to build demographic profiles. We're like, who are people and where are they from? But we're not slicing and dicing that and then selling it so we can show you that new sort of ad.
That's great.
Search words.
That's great. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the crowd. So if people have any questions, you can just raise your hand. And we have Flavius who wants to go ahead and ask the first question.
Thanks so much. It's great to have an Axios man finally in the room after all the news there doing it daily. Good to see you. And a quick shout out on the question of hire to 1776 from whom you coached Dominique, your VP of Culture and HR and Culture. Dominique was.
Oh yeah, exactly. She's absolutely amazing.
Shout out
Yes.
to both companies, I guess.
Good.
And my question would be on the CMS. The critical question when you choose to teach the platforms on how has the off-the-shelf CMS that you use at the beginning, at least the Rebel Mouse serve you?
Yeah.
And what prompted the departure to an in-house CMS to answer what needs, and are you using any emerging technology? And I guess that leads me to the question of the reader: are we going to see more of the infinite scrolling newsfeed, or are you going to take us in another direction? Are you also experimenting with messaging apps or emerging platforms?
Okay, this is a lot. I'm not going to remember.
All right, so we're going to bring it up. So I guess the first question is about the CMS.
Rebel Mouse CMS. We launched very quickly. Like I joined in late August, started hiring in probably September, and the website went live in January of 2000, that following January. So we had sort of 5 or 6 months to turn this on. From a technology standpoint, we used a company called Rebel Mouse, which builds a lot of back-end systems for, I think, for Huffington Post, I think for BuzzFeed. Like they have a really great track record. Like they were the only way we were able to launch that quickly was using them. So like we on their sort of basic framework, we built kind of our idea. But then very quickly, once we got up and running, built our own. We just wanted to own our own technology on that. We wanted to have complete control over that. Once we brought that in-house, the experience for me as a journalist was amazing because like there's a dedicated person that I can give upgrade requests to and the way we built our CMS was like the technologists came down from New York where most of our tech team is based and sat in my newsroom for a week and watched us how we used it and asked us questions on how we used it and literally let us build a bespoke system, which is amazing. Like our CMS training takes like, I don't know, 90 seconds. You know, you sit down in front of it, you open it up, it's clean, it's beautiful, and people are just off on it. And so being able to launch quickly required Rebel Mouse, but being able to sort of own it and design it ourselves sort of had us pull us off that platform. I think maybe it took a year and change to do that. And now we're sort of self-contained.
You're keeping the infinite scrolling format, consuming the content on Axios? Or?
I think so. Like if I see something better, I'm happy to throw that away. But it's like, you know, Twitter's an infinite scroll, Facebook's an infinite scroll. They seem to be doing all right. I mean, if we look at the ways people engage on it, we think about like the most you can ask a person to do is this. Like right. Like they don't want to click. If something's way up here in the corner of their phone, they don't want to click on it. And so just if you allow people to just use their thumb like that on a mobile device, that's probably the best way to do it. And then messaging apps, I think you asked about. No. That's hard to do. Like, why don't we have an app? Building an app is hard to do. If you're going to build an app that's just not a web skin, it just looks like your website. And so this gets sort of back to the idea about why don't I have podcasts or more video? It's sort of like we're trying to be very deliberate in these new things we do, so we do them really well instead of doing them just for doing them. But I think some of the things on like Quartz's messaging app is really interesting.
Great. So we got this question online. This is from Wajahat Ali, he's a New York Times contributor. So he said that last week we saw Tom Brokaw of NBC in hot water for his comments about the need for Hispanics to assimilate. This raises questions about the importance of diversity in the newsroom. And then there's a study from Pew Research that issued that talked about newsroom employees are less diverse than U.S. workers overall. And so he asked, what is Axios doing to help address the issue of diversity in the newsroom, especially considering the 2020 elections is coming up and there's a lot of women and people of color that are candidates.
So I get back to the fact that the sixth employee was a talent person, like a recruiting person. And like her first day is like, this is a priority for this company. And like, and that came from, the founders. And so I had someone to help me think about that. Like what has been so incredibly challenging, actually not challenging, enlightening about recruiting is the importance of networks, when we would go and look for people, I would say, or Jim Vandehei would say, the CEO, or Mike Allen would say, oh, I know some people, we'll just interview them. And if you follow that network, you're just going to find the same people ever and ever. And what the recruiting team has done under Dominique, who's amazing at this, is force us to just blow those networks completely up. and not just call the 3 people we know who know the 3 people they know to source our talent, but to really methodically look for people we don't know, for voices we don't have. And
so how has she done that? Just in terms of, is it using
like just build attending career fairs that I wouldn't, that we wouldn't typically attend it, or reaching out to universities that we typically wouldn't attend it, or just getting a premium membership to LinkedIn, and like we do, whenever we do a new hire, I'm required to follow a process. Like if I want to launch a newsletter, I can't just go into our recruiters and be like, I know a guy, he'll just write the newsletter. Like, no. We're going to do an intake meeting. We're going to write the requirements for this newsletter. You're going to tell us what kind of person you're looking for, and then we're going to go help you find them. Now, the person we'll put on the list, but that's not going to be the pool. The pool is going to be much, much, much larger than that. And they have proved me wrong over and over again. Like when we launched our markets newsletter, I was like, I know everybody in America who could write a markets newsletter. I'll just source this myself. And they were like, no. And that's how they found Dion, who wrote it, who was amazing. I didn't know who Dion was. Right. I didn't know he was writing that. They went and found someone I didn't know because they followed a rigorous process. And so every hire, that's how.
That's incredible. So one other question that came in was about Arlington. So what's great about Axios is that, Arlington is, pretty much known for the cemetery, I guess.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, because Amazon's moving here now, it's kind of in the spotlight. And you guys are in Clarendon.
Yes.
What's it like being in Arlington? For a company that has 143 employees and the traffic and all the interesting stuff that's in the news about it.
This is not a good question for me, because
you can be honest,
I
man.
live in the
You are the news. You can say what you want.
When Jim Vandehei was at Politico, which is in Arlington, I once had a lunch with him just to sort of chat with him, and he talked a little bit about what I wanted to do was at Bloomberg, and I told him because I lived in the district and I worked in the district, I told Jim, I will never work for you in Virginia. Jim Vandehei beat me on that one. I love our office space. The view
went to school in
amazing.
DC.
I went to school in Georgetown. So I've been in DC. I live over on.
But you were like, no to Virginia. Right?
I don't want to ride the Orange Line under the river, and now I do it every day.
I live in Annapolis. I used to take New Carrollton. That's the Orange Line too. Yeah, I know exactly how you feel.
So I've made peace with that. But it's been a great location. The office space is amazing. Roy loves to talk about the taxes in Virginia compared to the taxes in the district. I can get downtown in 2 minutes on the train because we're attached to the metro. So I can't knock it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's in light of Amazon moving here, is that going to affect you guys at all in terms of your decision?
I don't think so. I think we talked about a little bit at that company. I think we've got a pretty long-term lease because we just did a build out at this space, and we're in Clarendon, and Amazon is going to be further down here in the Crystal City area. So I don't think specifically us, unless we're going to expand a ton more, it's going to make everything more expensive. I think that's almost a regional impact as opposed to just what metro stuff you're at.
Cool. And then another question was about social media. I think one thing we kind of talked about was a lot of journalists, their focus typically is kind of on Twitter.
Yeah.
And they have these huge followings. And that can be good things, can be bad, sometimes it leads to flame wars. So what is, I guess Axios, you personally give an opinion about, social media, but in general, a lot of media outlets have been focusing on social media, Facebook and Twitter. It seems like your model is moving away from that.
I think we can have 10 answers to this question, depending on the framing of it. So the way a media organization should approach social media and the way we approach social media is the top of a giant funnel, right? When we put something on Facebook, we put something on Twitter, that's a way of reaching readers. The interaction we get from those kinds of readers is garbage. It's not good. It varies from social network, but we find on Facebook, that reader will not typically get very engaged. They reacted to something emotionally. They clicked an angry face or a smiley face, and then they're on to the next sort of outrage on the platform. There's not a lot of scroll depth. I don't think we typically convert them very often into subscribers. Twitter is somewhat similar, but if 100,000 people and then 5 of them become subscribers and regular users, that's fine. There's no problem. The way journalists use Twitter, I kind of agree that they spend too much time on it. It becomes kind of an echo chamber.
It becomes a huge
filter. We think about that. Oh wow! I guess all of America must be talking about this thing because my Twitter feed is blowing up, and most of America is not.
Yeah.
And then I think the way journalists sometimes behave on Twitter is bad. So the Axios social media policy is 2 tiers. Tier 1, the platinum tier, is delete your account. There are no members of the platinum tier yet. Tier 2, though, is to realize that you're a representative of Axios and There are forces on the internet who are like to destroy journalists, like to call them fake news, to undermine their reporting. Do not give them
call out culture.
Don't give them ammunition for that. Don't go on the internet and mouth off about Donald Trump or Nancy Pelosi, because the internet, A, does not need that, and B, when you do that, you are giving partisans ammunition to damage our brand and our trust. Like a joke I love talking about Axios is, like, we've got a really great level of trust. We've got a really great brand. We weren't wrong about the election in 2016. It's because we didn't exist, but still, we're starting from that high point. And so, like, police yourself on social media. Police yourself when you do television hits, and don't mouth off political statements. Like, speak from reporting. Like, if you have reporting that answers a question, and analytically, that's great. But the way people react on Twitter, I think it's damaging.
It's good because when you engage the Axios brand, it feels really, it's like, the news sometimes feel like everyone's just like screaming. Yeah. The Axios is like the calm adult in the room, and it's just like giving you like how it is. Like, even your Twitter handle, it's Axios Nick. And that's like your company's name is in your
Well,
handle.
I mean, I'm kind of on the executive team, so I kind of I sort of realized, like, when I was at Bloomberg, my Twitter handle was first word Nick. Like, I got on Twitter as a means to an end, just because so my boss at Bloomberg was like, you got to get on Twitter. I was like, fine, I'll get on Twitter. I do see the value of it in finding information. Like, I sometimes hate myself for the amount of time I spend on how addicting it gets. But if you look at my Twitter feed, all I'm tweeting out is Axios stories, or times I go on television or something. And I'm not tweeting out, I can't believe this politician did this horrible thing that's awful.
They lied again.
Like, I'm a journalist, right? And I think a lot of journalists who sort of get swept up in that, I don't think it's good.
How is your engagement on social media now that you're at Axios? Is it any different from what you have?
Like, personal engagement?
I mean, just like sort of what you're seeing with your base now, because the Axios brand is like so different. Are you seeing it just sort of, is it mostly like your customers, or your readership? Is it everybody in the world, or is it not changed that much?
It is still, it's a lot. It's very politics focused. I think sort of, you can't just, like, Trump in politics is such a massive story. We see that in traffic, right? Like a scoop on Trump will beat a scoop on essentially anything, and we've tried them all. Uber used to come close,
Really?
but not like, still orders of magnitude different from Trump. And so a lot of the noise interaction is sort of on that. But what's interesting is that a lot of that, like when people interact with us sort of over email, or sort of get feedback, we get a lot of it based on politics. But when it's based on politics, it's mostly just screaming. Like, oh, I can't believe you're so biased. Oh, you're awful. You're the worst. On other topics, like particularly we have a newsletter called Future written by Steve Lee, which is amazing, which is essentially just about that. Like, what are the interesting topics about the rise of populism, or the opioid addictions, or robots, or AI that he writes about? Very little Trump, except for sort of the populism stuff, and he only speaks about it globally. The engagement he gets online and through email is far more, I think, deep and valuable, because it's like people like really want to interact with that more than just sort of spout off about.
So that's really interesting. So people actually respond to the newsletters, and then who's on the other side responding to it? Is it the person?
Every email newsletter we send comes from that person's real email.
That's incredible. And how do they manage that volume of email?
People don't.
You're so responsive to email. It's incredible.
People
by the way.
I'm an inbox zero lunatic. But like,
Great.
So most people don't write emails. Mike probably gets the most, and he's pretty good about replying.
How many does he get? Just out of curiosity, like.
He probably gets, hundreds and hundreds, and he's probably not an inbox. He is not. I don't think I'm betraying a confidence in saying Mike is not an inbox zero guy. I am. We have an email address on our website, news@axios.com, which comes to me in a group of editors. So if we can find if someone flags a correction or an error or something, but sometimes they'll just ask questions and things. And so, like, as soon as I get done with this, I'll take my phone out and see what we have.
That's great. I guess we'll open it back up. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess, have you ever struggled with condensing a complicated story into the smart brevity? Like, have you ever had an issue trying to fit it into the amount of words that you?
Not really. I mean, it doesn't have to be. I mean, you can generally distill anything down into sort of 2 sentences. Like, the way you think about it is, like, Mike calls it the barstool test, where if you're sitting on a bar stool watching a sporting event, it's always a Packers game because Jim Van Hyde's from Wisconsin. and you wanted to tell the person sitting next to you what the news story, like what would you say? Like what are the 2 sentences you got? And what's clarifying about that is if you turn to them and told them like a news story is written, the person would think you're insane. They think you're out of your mind. But what often happens is like when younger journalists write stuff for us, I'll come over and say, this is interesting, but what you're trying to say, and they'll say 2 sentences, and they'll say, you should have typed that. So we've never had a problem distilling it down into a first 2 sentences, and then we always have, like there's a go deeper button on every story where we need it, and we can essentially go infinite. I hope we wouldn't, but we can easily do often 400 or 500 words sort of beyond that as needed. I've not found that to be a problem. I mean, wherever it's a problem is when we have journalists who are sort of struggling, when we do aggregation like that, so take a big story and make it into Axios style. When the journalist is struggling to write a headline or struggling to write that first and second sentence, it's kind of a signal that maybe the story is just boring, right? Maybe you should just stop. Like have the courage to take your hands off the keyboard and knock it off.
And then how do the newsletters get organized in terms of the content? Like, so like usually the newsletter, the way they work is usually I think it's about 5 or 6 topics.
No more than 10, but Mike cheats and we'll sometimes do like a bonus item. No less than 4 typically. Like 6 to 8 is a pretty good length typically.
What's incredible with that is that even though it's very brief, the topics that are selected are so engaging. Like I usually read the entire newsletter from beginning to end. And my wife will like wake me up and I'll be like, yeah, I gotta read this newsletter. Like, don't talk. Like, I'm just like the first thing I'm doing.
But it won't take long.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just like, but it's just so engaging that I just don't want to break my concentration to read it. And so like, how do you select out of all the news that's happening all over the world? How do you pick the topics that are the most relevant?
And you hire people to do that, right? Like I think the funnest thing about the way we structure Mike's email, which was the first one where we first started thinking about it, like Mike's Axios AM, Mike's top 10. Mike has to pick 10 things, right? And there are never, like Mike's dream he always talks about is one day publishing a newsletter which just says, well, there was no news today, get on with your life. But there's always something happening. It's like the more challenging thing is to limit it to that, to have the courage to sort of stop typing and like the respect for your reader to say, you know what, I could give you 15 things, but I'm going to pick 8. And you know that that's the right 8. And that just comes from like hiring really, really good journalists.
So how do you foresee the growth of Axios now? And we talked about this earlier, is that you guys have decided not to get another round. That's a very interesting decision.
We don't need it, right?
Fascinating. So you're not doing growth for the sake of growth. Not trying to like take over not trying to get market share per se.
Right. I mean, as our founders have spoken about this a lot, sort of in their press tour, sort of around our anniversary, is that, I mean, the cuts you see made by media companies are because you went out and raised a ton of money, right? Like, if you raise $500 million from venture capitalists, the venture capitalists will expect a return on that. And the revenue required for a return on $500 million in venture capital is a lot.
It's a lot, 10x that, right?
Good luck going to find that revenue. We've raised $30 million, so it's like a little more of a bit of a manageable problem to build there. Like we're not expanding just for the sake of expanding. Like I don't want to raise $100 million and then have to go hire 1,000 journalists. Like I've hired 50, and that was taking me 2 years, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's
such a smart way to grow a company in general. Not to be obsessed with the growth for the sake of growth, and it's really refreshing to see that in terms of the news room. So who do you see as your competition for Axios? Is it new media? Is it traditional media? Is it social media?
I have a clever answer for this. Thank you. So generally, sort of in the news business, our competition is sort of publications that do the same thing that we do: the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Journal, the Economist, the Wall Street Journal. But if you approach it sort of more broadly, what the competition is I look at it like how the number of seconds in a day, right? We're all walking around with our mobile phones constantly, and I can do whatever I want in like those minutes I'm awake. I can talk to you, I can watch a movie, I can read a book, I can stare out the window. How can I take 90 seconds of that time and be valuable enough to make it worth your while? And I think like when you approach creating information like that, it becomes very clarifying because you're in a war against Netflix and Facebook and Google and Amazon and people's children and looking at a sunset or eating your
Candy
lunch.
Crush.
Right, exactly. All those things are competing against that. And so the value proposition I think that Axios makes is if you want to get smarter faster on the topics that matter, there's all these kinds of things. Like there's a multitude of sources available. And if it usually took you 10 minutes to do that, right? Okay, well, what can I do? What if I get you to read Axios AM? It takes you 5 minutes to do that. What have I just done? I've given you 5 minutes of your life back. Like no one's going to give you a greater gift.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I think there's a lot of focus on companies like Facebook and Google and this notion that they've got a triopoly. If you throw an Amazon in there,
Yeah.
It's the notion that like that's it. We're not going to be able to innovate. And I think that we're seeing now all the criticism and the regulation that's people are talking about putting into these companies. But even beyond that, the pay-per-click model is something that is just it's so like unnatural. Like when you consume anything, we're having to pay for things up front. And I think what Axios is showing is that there's a lot of room, not just in the news space, but in terms of just how we consume.
But you should build, but like the key thing is to get that attention and engagement is to build a relationship with that reader. Don't build a relationship with that platform. Like what a lot of publishers realize is like, well, I'm gonna build to the algorithm,
or I'm gonna make my own platform, like maybe like BuzzFeed or something else.
But BuzzFeed was still building to the algorithm on the scale.
Mm-hmm.
There was a story I read today. They were, I think it was a Digiday story where they cited some BuzzFeed data that they had, which said there were stories that were getting 200,000 views a day via Facebook, and then Facebook turned the knob and they got 20,000 views, and they were just going, that's why Upworthy went out of business. That's what Mike went out of business. If you're building for the search algorithm, then Google may tweak it one day and then all that traffic goes away. And we see this sort of the noise in SEO and in search traffic that we get as Google sort of refines and changes that. What Google and Facebook can't do is make you unsubscribe to an email, right? What Google and Facebook can't do is break a bond that I've formed with a reader who wants to type axios.com deliberately and coming and consuming my content. And I think that's the way we've approached it, instead of sort of chasing it through the platform. Like building our own connection on that attention instead of relying on the generosity of Facebook or Google.
And that's is like from a starter perspective, that's such a sound business model because you're not relying on this, like your risk for these companies. And you gave the example with Facebook. I think they had a lot of scrutiny after the elections because they were like, look, all this stuff was happening under your nose and there was nobody really, watching or regulating it. And what they did was the way they dealt with sort of, I guess, the fake news problem was they were like, all right, well, we're just going to go back away from the publisher links.
We'll downgrade all
and
of
we're
it,
going to go back to just sort of like more like organic user-generated content. And that was a way to kind of skirt the issue of public scrutiny. But then everybody, and not just the media world, but even for us as a company, like a lot of our clients that we're generating organic content for, you see the traffic just dies and it forces you into the pay-per-click model. And for us, it just becomes very costly. So now a lot of digital agencies are like, okay, how do we get off of Facebook and Google and go back into engaging with customers more directly? And so I think that's kind of the unintended consequence of this. What's great with Axios is that you guys avoided that. You just dodged an entire bullet from the get-go.
We talk a lot about sort of like that audience acquisition. And
when did that was that in 2016? Is that
when we started, we talked about it.
So this was like happening right when we started the company.
Like Facebook was doing a lot of these kinds of things. We never got a lot of Facebook traffic, I think, at the start, because we knew we sort of had a sense of that was going to happen. So like a lot of the hires we made at the start came out of that social traffic universe, and then they were almost like they had battle scars from it. Like sort of like they knew how to game the system, and they knew if you're gaming it, you're sort of constantly in this war with the platforms to do that. And they knew that if you played that game, you were eventually going to lose.
And so they lost it was like.
And so we did.
Yeah.
Right.
Smart. Any more questions? Go ahead.
There's a question from online from Flavius. Neiman Lab 2019 predictions for journalism predicts that reporters will use inputs from the audience, and you can see that in the success of The Correspondent and its fundraising success, which is kind of focused on that model.
Yeah.
Do you see any audience input in Axios' journalism in 2019 or beyond?
I read every email I get, and so that's a version of audience input. We encourage readers to write back to us, but like I don't have a secret plan or any kind of vision of how to sort of like create community journalists. Like as I view this as a consumer of journalists, it's sort of like I want to read someone smarter. I want them to do the work. I don't want to do the work. Like I want you to go figure out what's the news is important and bring it to me because I've got 50 other things to do. I got 2 kids. Like, come on. So, and it's also like, and we also haven't created we've been very deliberate about like not having comments. I think comments are cesspools on most websites, and so we haven't really. It's like the Correspondent, I thought what they did was amazing. They raised $2.5 million, like that, those guys have a clear vision of what that looks like. It's not a vision I have.
I think this will be probably the final question. We
Yeah.
have a few minutes left. So this is your 2-year anniversary. Where do you see Axios going in the future? Which is a very heavy question. Think short term, maybe like a year or two.
I mean, short term, I have a product roadmap of things I want to launch.
Is there anything you can talk about?
I gave you 4. I gave you space, cities, education, future of education, and maybe blockchain again, contingent upon is blockchain for real, and can someone explain it to me? And then continue to think about those broader questions. We had the product I mentioned called Deep Dive. I really want to explore a lot more this year. Sort of like, can we take this smart brevity model that works really good in sort of quick hits on breaking news, and can we tell more longer journalism, not necessarily longer for long length's sake, but can we go more in depth on that? And I love talking about the lessons I've learned from Axios and sort of how to deliver content, and think about, like, does it work outside of news, right? Is this just an efficient way to think about conveying information?
So you're going to add more newsletters. Is there anything else? Like, are you going to move towards a subscription model? There's no mobile app in the future?
I'm only going to say what Jim said about subscriptions, that yes, but it's a secret. I think he said it's not what you'd expect.
Interesting.
I mean, the point I would make on that is serious, is the deliberative way of building a media business is to have multiple revenue streams. And this is not rocket science. This is the way everyone does it. Events, advertising, subscriptions. We have 2 of those. Subscriptions is the 3rd as a recurring revenue stream, and it's on our list.
Great. Well, thank you so much for stopping by, Nick. That was a great conversation. You guys can tune in for our podcast next month, and we'll go into more about a company called Tiger Lily and how they're fighting breast cancer and supporting people that are going through that process. Again, I'm Kermit Zaman, and thank you for tuning into the Campfire podcast.
That's fun.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
Hour goes by fast, huh?
No kidding.
Let me just hit stop. So.